Tonight on Tower Talks, a look at the state's proposed school voucher legislation. Trump acts on immigration and tariffs while Abbott speaks on the state of the state. Updates from Texas's 89th legislative session. All this and more on Tower Talks. Hello, and welcome to Tower Talks. Tonight we have a great show for you. My name is Shaik, and this is the show where we take a closer look at stories affecting Texans, Austinites, and students right here at UT Austin. But first, before we get started, we are going to take a look at school vouchers tonight. We have associate producer Justin Doud with us tonight to tell us a little bit more about school vouchers and what's going on in the legislative session. Hi Justin, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for coming on the show about school vouchers. First, can you tell me a little bit more about what school vouchers are and what they do?
Yeah, so when people talk about school vouchers or school choice, it's kind of a really broad term that could encompass any number of things. So there are 34 states in the U.S. that have some form of school choice system or voucher system. But essentially what that means is that it is a program or a certification that uses taxpayer funds to fund a child's private education. So it takes funds that would normally be allocated towards public school funding or to taxpayer uses and puts it towards private education funding.
All right. And so can you tell me a little bit about what the pros and cons of this bill are? What do the people argue on both sides of the bill, or school vouchers in general?
Yeah, so advocates of school vouchers generally say that it gives them more options for their students' education, right? So they look at school choice and they think that it's going to give them the ability to get into a private school and to pay for an opportunity that they may not otherwise be able to afford. So this piece of income that they're going to get from the state may be able to be allocated towards private school funding that otherwise they wouldn't be able to afford. They also tend to think that public school and public education is failing to a degree and that there's some detriment to how we have funded public education and what's being produced there. Now, opponents of school choice often say that, that's kind of a misnomer of a name. They say that it's not really a choice at all because the tuition costs for a lot of these private schools are going to be so exorbitant, so substantial that when they get this funding from the state, whatever quantity it will be, and we're going to talk about what that is proposed to look like for Texas, but whatever quantity of funding they're going to receive from the state, it's not enough to make a substantial difference for the communities that need it most. So opponents of voucher systems or school choice say that really what this is going to do is kind of provide a tax break for some of the richer families that are already going to sending their kids to private schools, and that it'll just make it a little bit cheaper for them to go to those schools.
Right, and speaking of Texas, you mentioned that there's a number of states that have some form of school choice. So Senate Bill 2 is the one that is doing school choice for Texas specifically, and it's set to be debated probably sometime this week even. So what does Senate Bill 2 specifically entail? What are some of the key factors that people should look out for?
Yeah, so a big thing with the bill last session, because this is not the first time that they've tried to pass a piece of voucher legislation in Texas. Last legislative session, it tied in public funding to the bill. So funding for public schools was attached by Governor Abbott to the school choice or school voucher bill. And so when it was kind of an attempt at an incentive for Democrats or Republicans, more so, that were opposing voucher legislation to vote for it so that they could also fund public schools at the same time, and kind of vice versa, that if they didn't pass it, public schools wouldn't receive funding. That's not how it is this session. It didn't go well for Abbott last session. So the approach that he's taken now is that they're two separate entities, two separate bills that will be undertaken by the legislature, and the hope is that, at least what I think, is that when legislators that oppose vouchers don't want to take on as much of the wrath that faced some of the opponents last session, they have the ability to cast present not voting votes or to be absent for a vote on voucher legislation without it affecting their vote for public school funding. So that is a major change that could really affect how this ends up working out. Also, the makeup of the legislature is pretty different than it was last session, not in terms of the Republican and Democrat count, which only increased for Republicans by 2, but in terms of the conservative degree of conservativeness that some of those members have after a large percentage of those that opposed vouchers were ousted last session. Another big thing with Senate Bill 2 that has been proposed and is set to be voted on probably this week in the Senate at least, is that it would initially provide $2,000 as a stipend or as a funding allocation for students as a minimum, and that's variable. It can increase depending on what's funded, unless it is someone or an organization or entity that is accredited by the Texas Private School Accreditation, I think it's communion or committee, and then you would get $10,000 per student or $11,500 if it's a child with disabilities. So really big incentive for accreditation there from this committee or from this organization and this oversight body. This is going to be an application program. Parents will have to apply for it, and in the bill there is an incentive for low-income households and children with disabilities to apply for that with 80% of the slots or so. And there's some variability with that number, but around 80% of the slots being reserved for those communities.
Right. And you kind of alluded to this a little bit when you discussed the last legislative session. This was kind of a pressing issue in 2023. It was one of Abbott's big ticket issues, and there was some controversy surrounding that whole situation. So can you kind of touch on that a bit and what that means for this legislative session?
Yeah, so last session, Republicans have for years had a large majority in the House, right? The bill last session, just like it's going to this session, we think, sailed right through the Senate without much issue or controversy. When it hit the House, though, a bipartisan coalition formed against the bill. 21 Republicans joined with Democrats to oppose voucher legislation passing. And so those 21 Republicans, because they kind of flipped sides on this one issue, they prevented that bill and that piece of legislation from being able to be passed. So when that happened, Abbott began to threaten a lot of those 21 members and say, we're going to fund primary challenges against you. I'll use my donors, I'll use my funds and my PACs, and I'm going to put a lot of that towards your opponents in primaries so that we can get more conservative members in the next legislative body instead of people that don't want to, or representatives that don't want to pass voucher legislation. So of the 21 Republicans that opposed vouchers last session, 7 returned. 7 are back in the body this session. 5 decided not to run for re-election, and 9 of them, which is over a third of the 21, 9 of them lost their primary bids for re-election in the primary races because of funding. All 9 of those were funded against by Abbott's and Attorney General Ken Paxton's funders. So their opponents, which were by and large much more conservative, specifically in the area of education, were elected to the House. So all of that to say that basically the body is a lot more conservative this time than it was in the 88th session. So it looks like vouchers in some form, whether that's SB 2 or SB 2 with extreme amendments and modifications, are going to pass, even if some of those members that were reelected or some of those members that are representing rural communities and don't want to kind of face their voters' wrath when a voucher program comes in and therefore their public schools receive less funding, even less than they already are. Basically, it incentivizes them kind of not to participate.
Well, thank you so much. That was very insightful, a good look into school vouchers before we get into your interview with Casey Wright. Justin will be sitting down with Education Policy Fellow Casey Wright to discuss the implications of school vouchers. Tower Talks will be right back.
13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Oh, you're live.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. I'm Justin Doud, and I'm here with Casey Wright. Casey is a master's student in the Education Policy and Planning program at UT Austin. She's also an Education Policy Fellow at the Intercultural Development Research Association. She was also previously a fourth grade teacher in East Austin for 2 years. Welcome, Casey. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can just jump straight into it. Can you tell me just a little bit about why you got into education before making the switch to policy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always been involved in education my entire life. My mother is a principal now, and she kind of inspired me to pursue education. I got my education degree at the University of North Texas, and then decided to teach after in the Dallas area and here in the Austin area, and it was a great experience. I really got to teach amazing students and see them learn and love to grow, but I also saw a lot of challenges within education, and that kind of led me to want to pursue education policy.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were an educator, can you talk a little bit more about the challenges that you faced and saw, both broadly and in regards to resource access and funding? And then also, kind of expanding, how would an ESA program affect those challenges and educators, kind of for better or worse, whatever you think?
Yeah, that's a great question, Justin. We're seeing a lot of challenges in public schools across Texas, and I experienced them personally, and I'm sure people have been hearing all about it in the news. It's huge teacher turnover happening right now. It's super hard to get teachers to stay long term, which is what is best for student success. A lot of that is tied to teacher pay, which is ultimately tied to funding. And that's the real problem we're having in our system right now. Our basic allotment hasn't been increased since 2019, and inflation and things have gone up. The basic allotment hasn't been increased since before COVID. And we all know what's happened since COVID. Things have only got more expensive. Things are only more challenging to get into schools. And just apart from staff, resources are being cut. Districts are having to pass budget deficits because of this. Austin ISD is one of them. They had a huge budget deficit this past session, and it was detrimental to the resources they had to cut.
Right. And for viewers at home that might not know, can you talk a little bit about what a basic allotment is?
Yeah, so the basic allotment is basically the building block to school finance here in Texas. So every student, no matter where you go to school, each one of them is going to get $6,160 that gets kind of put for that student wherever they go to school. That's going to follow them wherever they go. And then students get a little bit more money added on based on if a student is in a bilingual education program or if a student is receiving special education. But really that basic allotment is the backbone of all school finance here, and it's what we really need to improve in order to help out all schools. And to answer your question about education savings account, how that would affect. I mean, this bill, Senate Bill 2, is designating $1 billion to be invested in this program, which is a lot of money that could be used for our public schools. And this ESA would only benefit roughly around 100,000 students. We have 5.5 million students who are in our public schools right now. We need to be prioritizing their education and helping to fix that system rather than creating a program that we've seen is not very beneficial for students of color, for students with disabilities that can be denied from private schools. We need to prioritize on public schools that have to accept all students.
Right, absolutely. So a consistent argument that opponents to voucher systems use is the funding cost from the legislature that could be put towards public schools instead. This session, pro-voucher legislators at the Capitol are trying to combat that by advocating for both a voucher system with an initial $1 billion investment, just like you said, and public school funding that includes nearly $5 billion in new funds for public schools as the bill stands, pre-negotiation. So if legislators are trying to do both, like they claim, why is that not the right approach to education in Texas?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I've heard that argument all around. The reality is our public funds will be going to private schools, and private schools are not held accountable to the same way that public schools are. Public schools that receive public funds, they have to do testing, and they have to follow a lot of protocol and special education laws that are federally held. Private schools really get to run the show however they want. They can discriminate based on race if they want. They can discriminate based on students with disabilities. They don't have to accept anybody, right? Unlike public schools. So that's kind of a huge problem we're seeing is that our public funds are basically going to be going to help fund discrimination in our private schools, which is not okay. And then also to students that attend private school, I mean, even if we pass both of those $1 billion helps for public schools, students that leave, that average daily allotment is going to be leaving public schools, and they're going to be losing that money. And people say, well, that means they don't have one less kid to educate. But the reality is public schools have fixed cost, right? The cost of the lights don't go down just because one student has left. Or if 2 students leave every grade, you still have to pay the same amount of teachers. So those fixed costs are going to remain the same even if students go out and use the voucher.
Right, and that's regarding attendance. So a lot of public schools in the state of Texas receive their funding based off of attendance, and that can change based off of when students are repositioned to private schools. So what would you like to see in place of vouchers to combat the challenges in public education that legislators keep reiterating to justify their proposed voucher implementation?
Yeah, a huge reason for vouchers, and I heard you say earlier, is that this idea that public schools are failing and that parents need to have options to go explore other things. And I frankly think that vouchers are a distraction from the real problem at hand, which is our public schools that are struggling due to financing. And a lot of our problems could be moved to start becoming fixed if we just funded teacher pay, funded the basic allotment. When you fund the basic allotment, you fund every single student in Texas. You help every single school in the state just to get all the resources that they need to help students prepare for college if they want to go, to find them teachers to teach them all the fun things that we should be doing. But it's really hard to do that when we're having to fight vouchers and focus our energy towards that instead of focusing on why are our schools failing? What are the things that we need? Do we need new programs? Do we need to help out our students with special needs? Do we need to create more bilingual education programs? That's what we should be focusing on. So we need to focus on the things that we know work rather than voucher system, which research has really show no true academic positive impact on the students that use it.
Right. So with the current makeup of the Texas House, it looks like vouchers in some form are going to be passed. There's a strong holdout of groups of legislators that oppose the passage of voucher legislation, but it doesn't seem to be quite enough. So if SB 2 is passed, as some expect, is there any sort of compromise or amendment to the currently proposed bill that you're looking for, to kind of dilute its effect or to otherwise change its impact on public education?
That's a really good question. I will start from saying, it's not a done deal yet. We will see. Right. We're fighting the fight right now to see. We're able to do 3 special sessions in last session. But if Senate bill were to pass, we want there to be guidelines and procedures around it. We want these private schools to be held accountable. If we're going to put public funds to private schools, we need to know that it's working, right? Are the students actually getting what they need? Or are the vouchers just helping students who are already previously in private school? Or are they actually helping students who were struggling to get in private schools before? So we want all that disaggregated data to see is this program successful? And if we look in 10 years and it's not, should we still be putting billions of dollars towards it? So we definitely want accountability for private schools. We want data to follow it. And then we want there to be a sunset review, which is a review of programs in the Texas Education Agency to see if whether or not programs should continue on or not. So all those procedures just to make sure that this is a good investment for Texas taxpayer dollars.
Right. And another accountability measure that a lot of opponents to voucher legislation have talked about, and you touched on this briefly, is that children with disabilities, these private schools have to face no accreditation. They don't have to adhere to federal laws or state laws, including a whole host of disability laws that have been passed in the past decade in Texas. So would that be one measure of accountability that you're hoping to see in the bill, is to require that private schools that receive this fund be participating, obligatorily in either federal or state laws?
100%. And other voucher programs we've seen in other states have had that stipulation that you have to follow the federal and state special education laws that all public schools have to follow. When I was a teacher, we had to have annual reviews. We had IEPs, which are individualized education plans, to make sure that we're meeting our students' needs. Private schools should be doing the exact same thing, right? So that would definitely be one of the accountability measures we want to put in the bill if we amend it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Coming up, our host Raiyan will be back with a deep dive into some pressing political news. Tower Talks will be right back.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. Let's take a look at some pressing political issues and the key information surrounding them. Starting off with immigration, President Donald Trump made border security and immigration a key issue of his campaign. His first day in office, he declared a national emergency and issued several executive orders on immigration. The orders address ending birthright citizenship, border security, asylum, enhanced vetting of visa applicants, and more. However, last Thursday, the president faced his first challenge when a federal judge temporarily blocked the order ending birthright citizenship. Further, 22 states and rights groups have filed lawsuits to halt the order, arguing that it violates the 14th Amendment. Trump told reporters at the White House that they plan to appeal the block. Further, the Trump administration immediately scrapped the CBP One smartphone app, which migrants were able to use to schedule appointments with U.S. Border Patrol agents, canceling around 30,000 migrant appointments, according to BBC. In response to the app's closure, the American Civil Liberties Union has filed a legal challenge. Another executive order, in line with the president's deportation goals, expands the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE's power, allowing them to conduct arrests in places such as schools, churches, hospitals, and courthouses. Trump also signed the Lake and Riley Act into law, which gives authorities more power to deport undocumented immigrants accused of nonviolent crimes. In Texas, the Drug Enforcement Agency confirmed that both the DEA and ICE conducted several immigration raids in Austin last Sunday. Additionally, Attorney General Ken Paxton became the first Texas law enforcement official to sign an agreement to formally assist with Trump's deportation efforts. In a press release, Paxton called upon other Texas agencies and departments to join his actions and stated that they will, quote, enforce the law and protect America, end quote. Canada and Mexico have responded to President Trump's Saturday executive order placing tariffs on the two countries. With Trump's executive order on Tuesday, the U.S. will impose a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico and a 10% tariff on China. Trump will impose a lower 10% tariff on energy-related Canadian goods such as oil and natural gas. Canada responded with their own set of retaliatory tariffs. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said in a speech that the country would impose a 25% tariff on American imports starting Tuesday. Mexico has said that it will impose American tariffs, but has not given a rate. Trump has said these foreign countries pay the taxes, but in reality, the domestic companies bringing in these goods will pay these tariffs, amounting to a tax increase for Americans, according to the Associated Press. Governor Abbott declared Texas as the best state in the U.S. to do business. This is misleading. The ranking he's referring to was conducted by Chief Executive Magazine, a semi-right-leaning publication. Other outlets like CNBC and U.S. News consistently rank Texas as a top state for business, though not the top, placing the Lone Star State regularly in number 3 spot or lower. Abbott's assertion that local property taxes from authorities like Harris County are being raised substantially in one-year periods, diminishing the impact of statewide property tax cuts, is largely true, with authorities in the Houston area implementing tax hikes of up to 18% in 1 year on average in Harris County. When Abbott said public education funding and funding per student is at an all-time high, that was misleading. Technically, quantities are at a high because of inflation, but when adjusted for inflation, per-student spending has decreased by $590 over the past 10 years, and state and local per-student funding is down by 12.9%, according to Texas AFT. Existing funding is bolstered by recapture and by federal COVID-era funding set to expire next year, which will further increase the deficit. Abbott said that more than 30 states already have a form of school choice. This is true, but the plan proposed in Texas is significantly larger and different than the majority of these programs, even when adjusting proportionally for state size. Abbott's support for election integrity bills was preceded by a declaration that non-citizens must be barred from registering and casting a vote in Texas. This is already the law under Texas statutes. Finally, the governor's claim that that Operation Lone Star has reduced illegal border crossings in Texas by 85% is unverifiable. While crossings have gone down in recent months, according to the Texas Tribune, that's likely from a large number of reasons, only one of which is an increase in border militarization. This is all from Greg Abbott's State of the State, and you can read more at tstvnews.com later. Welcome back.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. Now let's take a look a little closer to home at the Texas State Capitol. Here are some updates from the 89th legislative session. This past Wednesday, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick revealed his list of the first 25 out of top 40 legislative priorities. Most of the bills on Patrick's list have yet to be filed. Instead, the list used his office's informal titles for each bill. The top two bills on his priorities are the Senate Bill 1, which concerns the state budget, and Senate Bill 2 on school vouchers, which we discussed today. According to Texas Tribune, Patrick said that last Tuesday that the Senate would pass Senate Bill 2 next week if Greg Abbott named it as an emergency item in his State of the State, which he did. Several of Patrick's priorities also concern public schools, including Senate Bill 24 titled Educating Texas Students on the Horrors of Communism, Senate Bill 10 titled Placing the 10 Commandments in Schools, Senate Bill 11 titled Protecting the Freedom to Pray in School, and Senate Bill 12 titled Establishing a Parental Bill of Rights in Public Education. Patrick's list also includes a proposal, quote, Stopping Drag Time Story Hour, which is a big issue in the last legislative cycle. Another proposal outlines establishing a Texas Department of Government agency, following in the footsteps of President Trump's federal Doud. Increasing the school homestead exemption and banning all forms of THC also nears the top of Patrick's list. In a statement announcing his list, Patrick stated, quote, The Texas Senate will continue to lead as the preeminent legislative body in America by passing our bold conservative agenda, end quote. Patrick's office promises to release the remaining 15 priorities soon. According to the Austin American-Statesman, in the fiscal year 2026, the Texas legislature has proposed $455 million from the state budget and funding for the University of Texas. That includes $285 million for instruction and operations and $73 million for infrastructure development. Many programs such as Dell Medical School, UT on-ramps, and AI research is funded by these state dollars. The funding is from a program called the University Availability Fund, which makes up 13% of the university's budget for that fiscal year. The program is used by the state to fund UT and Texas A&M systems. Outgoing UT President Jay Hartzell has argued for more state funding to combat inflation and allow for UT to expand programs in therapeutic neurotechnology and recruitment of new doctors in Austin, citing how important the Dell Medical School and a hospital is to the Central Texas community. On January 14th, the 89th Texas legislature filed dozens of bills that could adjust transportation policies affecting Texans. Senator Eckhart and Representative John Busey filed legislation in November calling for a high-speed rail system to link Austin, Dallas, and San Antonio together along the I-35. Senate Bill 424 and House Bill 48, introduced by Busey and Eckhart, would have Texas partner with a private entity to build and operate this new rail line with the ultimate goal of modernizing Texas transit, reducing vehicle emission and highway congestion. Texas Comptroller Glenn Hager confirmed that Texas lawmakers have an estimated $194 billion available for general purpose spending for the 2026-2027 state budget. Hager also stated that leaders need to be smart when investing in new transportation projects and creating the budget. Tower Talks will be back next week to discuss immigration. Be sure to follow us on social media at TSTV News on X, formerly Twitter, and at Tower Talks TSTV on Instagram. There you'll be able to find out when our next episode will be and the topics being covered. Check us out at tstvnews.com online and subscribe to our newsletter, Newsroom Notes. From all of us here in the studio, thank you for joining us this evening and good night.